When business changes, your cybersecurity risk changes, and your profile of what you're doing should change. If you're hiring a lot and growing, if you're rolling out new products and services, that can change how you should be protecting yourself.
You are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Fosivity, where we answer your questions and simplify information security for small businesses. Get the clarity you need to focus on the things that matter.
Well, hello. I'm Accidental CISO, and you are listening to the Mindful Business Security Show. Building an effective, right-sized security program in a small business requires some careful decision-making. Business priorities have to be weighed with security priorities, and implementation work has to be balanced with other business objectives. Today, we're going to talk about prioritization, road mapping, and ROI of security in the context of small organizations. But first, I want to put out a call for callers. Believe it or not, the hardest thing about producing this show every month is finding business leaders to call in and ask questions to get help with security challenges that they're wrestling with in their own organizations. We always need callers for the show, so if you have questions, be sure to visit the show page and submit a question or sign up to be a caller. And please share this opportunity with business leaders in your network so that they can get help too. Oh, and be sure to subscribe to the show. You should be able to find it in your favorite podcast app. My guest today has more than 30 years of experience in IT and security. Over the course of his career, he has spent a significant amount of time in both private industry and the Department of Defense spaces. Almost 25 years ago now, he was the primary author of a U.S. patent for the picture and video messaging technology used in smartphones today. These days, he's a former virtual CISO and strategy consultant termed startup founder. His cybersecurity startup, Level 6 Cybersecurity, helps their customers make better strategic decisions about cybersecurity. When he isn't working, and let's be real, when you're a startup founder that isn't often, he enjoys playing guitar and drums and is an aspiring author of children's fantasy novels. It's exciting to have you here with me today. Welcome to the show, Kevin Jackson.
Hello, thanks. I'm honored to be here. This is absolutely a pleasure and looking forward to the conversation.
We've chatted about this several times over the last couple of years, and we're finally making it happen. So I'm stoked to have you here. In the interest of transparency, Level 6 Cybersecurity is a Fosivity client, but they are not a sponsor of the podcast, and this is not a sponsored episode. So, Kevin, we've known each other for several years now, and I've watched you build out Level 6 Cybersecurity from the ground up. And I know my one-sentence description in the introduction didn't really do justice to what you and your team are building over at Level 6. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the platform and how it helps with strategy decisions for cybersecurity?
Absolutely. The vision is a pretty easy one to put into a few words, but it's hard to really flesh out unless you've got a lot of time for a lot of words. The vision is to use open source intelligence, which is a fancy way of saying all the data that's just out there in the world within a machine learning model to create and model how cybersecurity really works, how things really succeed and fail, and wrap all that within a platform so that users can have a source of answers, have truly an AI virtual CISO that they can tap into to get answers that are relevant to them, that are important to them in their industry and their size and their sector for their specific journey, where they are in their cybersecurity operational timeline, and have relevant and timely and current info that makes sense for them at any time. So the idea is, why don't we use all of this data? There's so much data extant in the world that's just available. If we intentionally begin collecting all that data, as we did 3 years ago, and create a model that simulates and looks for the correlations between all of the different ways of defending an organization, all the different controls and operational decisions and factors and staffing and outsourcing and on and on and on, and correlates those decisions with success and failure, and correlates all that with the costs of success, the defensive measures, and the costs of failure, we should be able to get a really powerful tool that can give the answers quickly to the most important questions about strategy creation, prioritization, what to do when, what to do more of, what to do less of, as a new and more powerful input into the cybersecurity decision maker as they make all those decisions, as they budget, as they plan, as they hire, as they outsource, all of those having a data-based input to that world. That's what we've built. That's our vision.
Yeah. And having all that information, be able to adjust those levers and dials to model the program differently is really exciting to me. I wish I had had that tool when I was a full-time CISO for sure. Uh, Being a startup founder is really hard. I've worked in startups a lot in my career, and have watched the founders. And being a small business owner myself, as a founder as well of Vocivity, it's a lot of work. What inspired you to pursue this path and build this platform instead of any of the other things you could have done as the next step in your career?
Absolutely. So the interesting thing is, I knew that startup life was hard. I've been a part of a startup before, like you. I was part of a startup way back 20 some years ago. You mentioned in the intro when I worked in the mobile messaging and mobile data space. That was a startup. They were pre-IPO and venture capital founded, and I got to see as an employee what that was like. And then I watched a lot of orgs go through it in more recent years with folks that I know who started tech companies. And I knew it was hard. And it was even harder, and it still is, than I thought it would be. So that's saying something. I thought, boy, I know this is going to be hard. Now I underestimated how difficult it can be. But it wasn't enough by far to dissuade me from the vision and from the mission of what I know we can do to help the cybersecurity community, to help folks like me. This is really a big part I didn't mention before and would like to, is that like our actual mission, like our vision statement is pretty simple. It basically says, help the CISO, help the cybersecurity decision maker. My passion became, when I was a CISO in the pharmaceutical space, finding a way to help myself then and help those folks now who are in those positions because it's so difficult. The pressure on leadership in cybersecurity to be darn near perfect, to have their own, rear ends on the line when things go wrong, the burnout, the potential liability that we see stories of nowadays, where cybersecurity decision makers, CISOs, and managers in the cyberspace themselves get in trouble because things go wrong, lose their jobs, lose their position, have their reputations hurt. We have a very difficult place in that space right now. And our vision is, why can we help those folks? Can we help people in those decisions have less stress, less burnout, which can then lead to more healthy, longer lasting cybersecurity leaders that can do a better job protecting everyone. So that's really the vision. So despite how difficult it has been, and it's been crazy difficult, the vision, the mission we're on to create a platform that can actually revolutionize how the people in these positions, how CISOs and CISO equivalents do their job and improve their lives, lower their stress, and improve the outcomes in the actual security world of these organizations, it's worth it.
And at the very beginning of the show, I mentioned balancing business priorities with security priorities. And, this is something that the platform helps your customers do. How have you approached that problem within your own business at level 6 as you've been building the company, building the platform, but also having to build a security program as a cyber company?
It's a very important part of what we do because we are a cybersecurity company. But frankly, it needs to be a part of every small business, is realizing that security isn't optional, and it's not, security doesn't take a back seat just because you may not have a lot of resources or time. You may not have a lot of expertise. You could be building a startup that works in financials or manufacturing, and you don't have that layer of expertise, and you may think, well, I'm not really super concerned about that, or it'll be okay. I'll hand it off to someone else to manage, like an MSP or whomever. That doesn't absolve you of so much of the need, because all it does is increase your risk dramatically. The need is there. So we decided right up front, we're going to keep security in focus. because we know that our customers are going to look at us and want to know, do you have an organized cybersecurity program yourselves? How much risk are you putting us at if we work with you? And nowadays, that's kind of table stakes. And if you don't keep it in mind as an organization in almost any industry now, it becomes not just a level playing field, it becomes a negative. It puts you in a bad position. You become a riskier proposition than your competitors. So it's really non-negotiable nowadays, and from my perspective, even in industries that used to really not pay any attention to these things, because the attackers don't care who you are, how big or small you are, and what industry you're in. They're going after everyone and everything because they're doing it with automation and AI, and it doesn't matter. They will come after us. So even though as small as we are, we invested in getting help. It's a big part of it. And I'll talk about more of that later, I'm sure. Getting help to establish foundational cybersecurity program parts and executing on them upfront and keeping that going over time because you really have to. It's no longer optional in today's world.
One of the things that has always impressed me in working with the level 6 team as a client was sort of the proactive nature and the vision that you've had regarding the security program that you've had, and keeping sort of a long-term state in mind as you're looking at the current state and what's appropriate now and what's the program going to evolve to. And there aren't that many orgs that think that far ahead as they're building their security program. So, everything that you are doing now, there was always sort of that also looking to the future. What's this going to evolve into? And it that always struck me and was something I really appreciated in working with the team.
I'm really glad to hear that. And it's worth saying that's something that we hope that, that's something we build into the Listen platform so that users who are in are led to look forward as well as in the current state by looking at, road mapping in a more automated sense and looking at progression over time and, metrics and scoring over time and compliance over time in the same way that we look at the data we gather, the open source intelligence over time as it evolves. That there's just nothing static. I think cybersecurity might be the most dynamic field I've ever worked in. There's simply nothing static. And so no one can afford to stop and just rest on your laurels because you're immediately behind. So, that's one of the things we want to automate is the nature of keeping moving forward and wanting to stay updated, seeing when trends change, when controls should change, when investment should change, when one approach may be better than another, because there's so much change. It's so dynamic in how attackers act and in how we can defend ourselves.
That's a part of why the field is very exhausting to work in as well. The rate of change and the constant change it's a lot, and
It's incredible.
it can be exhausting to the professionals in the industry. Uh, Based on sort of the data and the analysis of a wide range of security programs in the Listen platform, are there things that kind of consistently come to the top of the list that stand out as offering the best bang for the buck when it comes to building a right-sized security program for a small organization?
Yeah, there are, and it's been interesting to see these have changed over the course of the last couple of years. We watch the data and see how things evolve, but there are some things that tend to rise to the top. Cream rises to the top kind of thing, just regardless of industry that we've seen, and that's also pretty universally true for small businesses versus mid market versus large. And it's interesting, and they're not always intuitive. It's not what you necessarily would have guessed, what I would have guessed, which is what I really love. I love when the data uncovers things that might be a blind spot. Almost always near the top of the list is the criticality of identity and access management as a focus area compared to many other cybersecurity domains. That is one of the few things that always is near the top, is that bang for the buck. If you're investing $1 into identity and access management, you're getting more out of that dollar than in almost any other area in your cyber program, because so much comes down to how you manage accounts, how you manage internal and remote access, how you manage people and roles and least privilege and all of the aspects of how you are functionally controlling everything in your organization. That is almost always near the top. Darn close to it, and this one didn't surprise me, and probably won't surprise you either, is vulnerability management. All aspects of understanding vulnerabilities, of patch management, of updates, of penetration testing for vulnerabilities and vulnerability scans, all those aspects and how they're managed and what kind of time frames are used to manage patching programs and to manage patch testing or not. Often it's not. All of those things are very, very high value, which makes a lot of sense. And another one that is very consistently near the top is the importance of monitoring overall. Having and investing in monitoring tools, log management, log aggregation tools um, at the perimeter, on internal systems, in the cloud, all of those have a high bang for the buck. Those are very often in the top three, almost regardless of how you slice and dice the type of organization. And on the other side of this, we regularly see kind of a contra, a contraindicating factor. There's a lot of people out there in the world, especially on LinkedIn and in Twitter, X, and everywhere else, who have leaned into the whole cybersecurity is all about resilience. It's more about how you can respond and recover because you're not really going to be able to defend. And I understand it because there's a ton of importance in how quickly and powerfully you can respond and recover. It matters a lot. But in the data we've seen and collected now over 3 years, incident response is not in the top 10 usually of the 22 or 23 domains we model. It's important. It comes in somewhere around that 11, 12 area, I think. But bang for the buck, investing in incident response, and then near that, IT disaster recovery, business continuity, they don't have the same bang for the buck in the real world data we harvest as things like identity, vulnerability management, and monitoring. So very, very consistent results we see right there, and a little bit against the norm because again, a lot of people nowadays are focused only on resiliency, not only, but big focus on resiliency, and the data seems to say there's still a lot of value in the core defensive posture and how you manage it, regardless of your organization.
It's interesting, sort of a hygiene, unglamorous. It's those. I hate to say the word boring, but it's kind of those kind of boring things tend to be the top of the list of like, identity management and how you handle your accounts and how you handle permissions and those types of things, how you handle patching, keeping your
Yes.
stuff up to date, just those fundamental things that they're not glamorous, they're not fun, they're
Right.
not exciting, but they're so important. And they're also not terribly expensive. It's just hard to prioritize them in sometimes.
That's a great point.
Monitoring uh, is an area that I see small businesses generally lacking in. When I do assessments of small businesses, that monitoring piece is one where very rarely do smaller organizations have that monitoring in place, and they're flying blind off it. They may have like antivirus software, but a lot of times it's not monitored, especially by a professional security operations center, outsourced that sees the stuff day in and out. Maybe they get the
Right.
alerts internally themselves, uh, but even often they're not even like managed things. It's each individual computer might pop up a notification, but the alert isn't centralized so that somebody gets that centrally to be able to do something with it and to be able to collect activity logs and investigate what happened. The monitoring for that is also usually a very weak point in small business. So I'm glad to hear that that's a good bang for the buck area, because some of the monitoring tools aren't always super inexpensive. They're not necessarily, super high price. They're a lot less expensive than incident response. But yeah, I agree that those things resonate with me as being high bang for the buck.
Yeah. Yeah. You hit the nail on the head when because so many of the decisions and processes and things that are in those areas, a bunch of them are human in the loop activities and decision
Yep.
making and governance. Governance is kind of cheap. to make the decisions, to put the walls and the barriers in the right places, and to put the processes in place is one of the lower cost. You're paying for the time of a person to develop the rules, the policies, and the procedures, and to implement them and monitor them. That's a whole lot cheaper than what you pay for a breach. You get those things in place, and you have people then who are, like you said, who are doing the human part of the monitoring, to respond to alerts, to do the investigations, to help the tools do the investigations. All that's a lot cheaper than just having to buy high-end tools, or like you mentioned, the sexier things in cybersecurity that are out there, that often come with a high cost. It doesn't have to be a super expensive endeavor to protect a small organization. That's the key.
In thinking about balancing business priorities and objective with security and making sure that you have the time allocated to do what you need to do in your security program, these boring things that are more of a hygiene kind of maintenance thing, applying the patches, but also rolling out access controls that don't add a bunch of friction
Yes.
into your processes. Like that takes a little bit of time and forethought to
Yes.
implement it well. Because if you try to do it too fast, you're not going to get it right, and you are going to add friction, and people are going to want to go around it. So, what are some key considerations that you recommend for small business leaders to keep in mind as they're trying to prioritize building their roadmaps for their security programs, and like how to balance that to integrate their security roadmap with their business roadmap?
Yes, and that's a huge arena that is so important, because it's that at every point in the process, if you're a security decision maker, you have to know the business side of the house. You need to know what your organization is really doing and what they want to do and why. There has to be that business focus and integration happening. Otherwise, you are likely to try to protect the organization in ways that, like you just said, that are contraproductive, that are counterproductive to what the business needs to do to create revenue, to survive. So it's really important, and it's often a challenge, right? Often cybersecurity folks come from a purely technical background, or they may come from a purely compliance background, or a little bit of each, but often they don't come from a business background. And so they may not know what the business really needs and wants. And it's so important that the time is taken to know what the business's risk tolerance really is, and to bring that in, and that, to bring that into the scope of what's done and how investments are made. That is absolutely critical. Far too often, you will see folks who they become labeled that famous phrase, the Department of No, right? Because we are not going to, this company is not going to get hacked. We're not going to get our data stolen. We're not going to get ransomware. And we'll do everything in the world to make that happen. But they're doing it, unfortunately, sometimes in a vacuum without listening to what the business needs. And that is a recipe for disaster. That's a recipe for a lot of stress in the end for the cyber decision maker, for that leader, as well as stress for the organization, who no longer wants to support or feels like they can support what the cybersecurity guy is doing. That is not where you want to be.
So before we jump to the phones, I always have this last question, and I love to hear everybody's thoughts on this because everybody has such different thoughts. If you had a magic wand and you could wave this magic wand in the air and have every small business owner and leader instantly know and understand something about security, what would you want that one thing to be?
The first thing that comes to mind is to understand really and practically, like to really get it, that compliance is not security. That you can be compliant, you can have every control in place in some way or another, and have absolutely no chance of defending your organization against attackers. That it matters how you are compliant, that it matters that these are living processes and that they are integrated, and that you are in connection with the business and the people and all the things that are outside and surround cybersecurity, that it's an integrated thing, and that it's not just about checking boxes. Even though that sounds like a common phrase, I still see it all the time, and I'll bet you do too, where there's not a real sense of what it means to not do
Mhm.
security as a box checking exercise, to not simply be happy with passing the security audit or passing the review or hitting, be able to generate a pretty good looking NIST assessment report. And then we're done until next year. That's the magic wand I would wave, which is to say, do that. Those those standards, those controls, they have a reason, they have a purpose. But find out and get the help if you need it. Figure out how to go beyond just the box checking and create a truly integrated, living program of cybersecurity that goes well beyond all of those things are honestly basics. You've got to take all that and integrate it and make it a living thing. Cybersecurity programs are living things. And I don't know if, especially in the small and mid market, if a lot of folks really get that.
I hear that said a lot. Compliance doesn't equal security, and I have to remind clients that as well as we're trying to make decisions and plan things in their program. And just checking the box doesn't always get it done. Like, we have to think about why we're checking that box and make sure we structure things in a way that's actually going to be effective for them, while also meeting their compliance
Yes.
needs from their customers or contractual standpoint, or if they've got some sort of regulatory compliance need or something like that.
Bingo.
Hey, Kevin, I've got some callers here that want to ask some questions and get some help on this topic. Are you ready to go to phones and take some questions?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Awesome. Let's go.
Do the cybersecurity risks to your business have you confused? Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast and sign up to be a caller on a future episode.
Our first caller on the show today is Mike from Phoenix. Mike, welcome to the show. How can we help you?
Yeah, thanks. So glad to be here and really love soaking up the wisdom here. So my question is, or my first question is, based on your experience founding Level 6, what do you think the biggest security mistakes are that are made by small businesses? And what thing, if overlooked, is most likely to cause a really bad day?
That's a fantastic question. And the biggest, especially in small businesses, the biggest mistake that I see the most often is small businesses simply assuming that cybersecurity, by and large, doesn't apply to them, or only applies in a very basic technical sense. More to the point, because we're a small organization, we don't need to look at a lot of the broader big topics in cyber. We just have to make sure we've got MFA turned on in our email and good antivirus, and that we've got good login controls for logging into our cloud that we're using for one application or another, and then we're good. Like the basics are enough is kind of often the expectation. And often that's an expectation that's fueled by the fact that small businesses often don't have a lot of budget. And so they assume often that, well, I can't do much. I don't have a lot of overhead that I can afford. So we're going to do the basics. Everybody does the basics if they're a small business, and I'll be fine. And that's just not a good place to start. That's not a good place to be. And we were just talking about this a moment ago. The truth is there are ways to do and be much more cyber secure in a well-rounded and programmatic way, even as a small business, that usually small business owners don't know. They don't know that there are ways to do this better. There are ways to do it in such a way that they are much more secure without it breaking the bank. Having the basics of risk management and governance in place, doing the basics of vendor management for all the things. Small businesses use a lot of third parties, right? Because they don't have a lot of people. Here at Level 6, we use a third party firm for some important things. But, we have to be, even though we're tiny, we've got to do our vendor management and our risk assessments and our checking in on the too many small businesses never even think about that. And on and on, things like we talked about earlier, least privilege and how you manage access and how you manage roles. Those things aren't super expensive. So it usually comes down to needing to get help of the kind that Focivity provides, help of the kind that our platform provides. Because if you take the time to look into it, you'll find okay, we can be a lot more of a well-rounded and secure organization without it costing a fortune, without having to have a cybersecurity program that's for, $1 billion enterprise. You can still have, and in fact, I think you open with this in the beginning. You could still have a right-sized cybersecurity program as a small business. It's a real thing.
You absolutely can. You can build a very effective security program for very small orgs affordably if you're focused on the right things and not just doing things because somebody says you should do them, but you understand why you're doing it, what risk you're truly concerned about, and what you're trying to protect from. I think one of the other big mistakes that I see, especially in smaller orgs, that undermine security, and it's an easy trap to fall into in small and medium sized orgs, especially, is the security program and the policies and the controls have to apply to everybody, and the senior leadership can't be exempted out of it. And that's somewhere where a lot of times we'll see, the business owner, or maybe executives, if it's a corporation and you've got, a C-suite, you may end up with the senior most leadership not wanting to have the same policies and controls applied to them. And that's really dangerous because they're high risk, high target folks. When people know that they're the CFO or the CEO at a company, they're going to be a target of phishing. They're going to be a target of scams and social engineering and these types of things, which makes it that much more important that they have things like multi-factor authentication enabled. And just because they're the CEO or the owner, they shouldn't be exempt from having to have multi-factor on their accounts. It's that much more important that they do because of the fact that they are important. So I think that's one of the biggest mistakes, in addition to kind of the stuff Kevin was talking about, that I see in small orgs. Kevin, you were just talking about compliance doesn't equal security, but it is really, really hard to have effective security without compliance. Because
Yes.
if you're not compliant with the controls that you did put in place, they're not going to function consistently, and that inconsistent operation is where you're going to have stuff slip through the cracks, and you're going to have security incidents and that really bad day.
That flows really nicely into my next question, which is, you know, you talked a little bit about how people get kind of stuck on the basics and then moving beyond that. What advice would you give a business who feels stalled out on their journey? They're like, okay, yeah, I'm a small business. Security is not what I do for a living. I did the basic things that ChatGPT told me to do. Like I have the multi-factor, the email security, and a couple of things. I checked a few boxes. What advice do you have for small businesses trying to figure out where to go next if they're stuck or stalled out?
Yeah, that is another easy one that I really like because, and we had to do this as well. The first answer to that is get help. You've got to get help when you are a small business, or even if you're darn close to midsize. And maybe if you are smart enough to know you are stuck, that's great. If you are savvy enough to realize that we could be doing more, we could be doing better, and I'm not sure, I think it might be a little more common that there is a kind of a stagnant posture that's developed, and leadership may not know that it's stagnant and may just be happy with it, complacent. The answer is to get help, is to reach outside of that small business's boundary and get expertise to lean in, look at where you are, look at what you're doing, and do the evaluations, do the assessment, not beyond compliance, though compliance is good. I love that you mentioned the value of compliance because yes, compliance is really important. It's not a negative in any way. It's not everything, but boy, is it powerful in helping. But getting external help, getting expertise to look in and do the assessments, help with the decision making. And again, there's so many ways we can get that nowadays. We have, expertise from people, expertise from tools, from software that can look in and let you know as an organization how you're really doing versus the current threats and the threats to come and the changes to come. Another thing about small business that's maybe kind of similar to cybersecurity as an industry is small businesses are always changing, right? Unless they're, well, even if they are not doing well, rather doing really well and scaling up or not doing so well, there's a lot of dynamic activity in small business. When business changes, your cybersecurity risk changes and your profile of what you're doing should change. If you're hiring a lot and growing, if you're rolling out new products and services, that can change how you should be protecting yourself. If you are shrinking, or if you're being acquired, or if you're acquiring someone else, or if you're rolling out new business tools, or there's a new sales process, all those changes have impacts on the security of the organization. And the answer, my number one answer is you've got to get help. Get help seeing, scoping, and understanding what the impacts of change are, what the current state is, looking into the future, help from folks or from tools that know the outside world and can bring that knowledge to you as that small business leader to figure out, okay, am I good? Should I change? Where should I go? And looking at the cost benefit of it all. There has to be that, especially if you're, like you mentioned, if you're a business that does not do cybersecurity for a living, getting help is a critical first step.
I think that's spot on, and to sort of just like completely distill that down for business owners or business leaders who are just looking for like sort of a prescriptive next step. Like when you've started with doing some of these fundamentals, but you're not sure, like, are we doing all the best practices we should? Like, you can take that best practices approach initially. The first step after that, I would say, do an assessment, either a self-assessment or have help to assess you against something like the NIST cybersecurity framework. Because, and the reason I mentioned NIST specifically instead of some of the other frameworks is because it also includes some governance stuff, as well as resiliency for being able to respond and recover from security incidents. Frameworks like the CIS controls are great, but they heavily fall onto the protect side of things, identifying what you have and protecting what you have, but they don't hit governance at the very front end, and they don't necessarily go quite as deep into IR. Well, they do get into some incident response and recovery, more technical controls and stuff as well. But doing that assessment, either a self-assessment or a facilitated assessment against a framework, is a good first step. Once you get through that and you have a program that's matured to that point, doing a more bespoke risk assessment is a great place to do that next thing, because that's where you're going to get to the specific things about your business, the specific risks in your industry, with the types of tools you use, the way your business operates, the way you interface with customers and vendors and partners and whatnot. That's where those specific things are going to come out. So if there's kind of a continuum, like you may start with best practices, maybe then look at a framework that's going to be a little more prescriptive, and then from there go to a more bespoke risk assessment. And you can find folks that can facilitate these pretty easily. But I think that's kind of a good maturity continuum, because that risk assessment can then inform other decisions and let you then decide, what are we really worried about? Are we going to accept this risk, or do we need to do something about it? Are we just going to insure against it, or do we want to actually implement controls or buy tools as you get to that point? So yeah, excellent thoughts on that, Kevin. Thank you for coming on the show today. Did you have any other follow-up questions?
No, I mean, I think that was really clean and well encapsulated, and great to get to meet you, Kevin.
Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. This is fun.
Our next caller on the show today is Danny from Eastern Pennsylvania. Danny, welcome to the show. What kind of questions you got for us today?
Oh, happy to be here. Huge fan. I think you guys are awesome. So I've been having a lot of conversations lately, especially with my clients, as they're either trying to still build out a security program, or they're trying to kind of revamp their existing one. So a lot of places have like new leadership, or they're trying to get new blood in, and they of course you always get to the whole like ROI. What's return on investment in the projects that we're doing in pursuit of revamping a security program, in pursuit of building a new one. But what they kind of don't even really think about, that we kind of have to back up a couple steps and saying, okay, cool, you want ROI, but like, how do you even begin to determine the metrics to measure that ROI, right? Like, is there a framework for that? Like, we all love frameworks. Like, is there a framework for that? But like, how you want to see return on your investment, you want to see, measurable progress, but how do you even determine what those metrics are going to be?
That's a great question, and several of the answers are not very satisfying. I mean, the primary answer is very carefully, and often the answer is with great pain. It's not easy to manage ROI in cybersecurity. So, I mean, there's, as you've probably seen before, there's some great frameworks out there for it. Things like the FAIR model, which have extraordinary overhead that come with them and require, you've got to get some consultants in, you've got to do some deep digging. You make a couple million of assumptions. It's very much based on what you're going to assume to be true, and the model of how it works is perfectly reasonable. And some people like the results that come out of a fair model assessment, and some people don't. There are similar models out there that try to tackle the cyber risk quantification world, and create real views on ROI that are similar, but maybe a little lighter weight. What we've decided to do in our platform and how we've built our actual listen, it's the Level 6 InfoSec Strategy Network, is to use an OSINT based approach and a whole lot of I'm not going to make a human do this type assumptions, but building in a model, a machine learning model that looks at the rates of breaches and their costs and their, both direct and indirect, and the industry specifics and the sector specifics, and models it more dynamically. We're a big fan of that, of course, naturally, that we are that we built it, so we love it. A much more direct way of getting to the same kinds of answers that are a little more customized. I really do believe that as we advance more and more into AI and machine learning tools, as we get over just the hype of LLMs and realize what the power is of some of the actual algorithmic work, the data modeling that can be done, I think we're going to get a wave of tools similar to ours that are relying on the academic research and the real world data and processing and giving much more, context sensitive answers on ROI, so that we begin to we take the weight of that problem off of individuals and consultants, and certainly out of the hands of cyber decision makers who have a lot more things to do than spend, dozens of hours trying to calculate ROI. And this is an area of cybersecurity that I feel is ripe for management by tools. It really should be a machine learning tool, an AI tool that does that kind of work. This is exactly what we have computers for, to manage tons of data and lots of numbers, and to learn over time what the real answers are, and to share those with us so that we can, stay on the things that humans need to be doing. So lots of answers. Not all of them are great yet, but I really do think that here with our model and some of the ones that are similar, we're starting to see how we can leverage open source intelligence and vast amounts of real world data to start to unlock that puzzle in ways that are quicker and a little more streamlined than some of the really heavy CRQ models that are out there.
And I think it's difficult to measure ROI of security tools when you're looking at the return is the negative of something, like that some event didn't happen because of it, because it's very difficult to prove that that event would have happened had you not done this. So some of the ROI can be demonstrated through, the implementation of tool and looking at what the tool's doing. If you're looking at, monitoring tools, for instance, and the information you're able to get out of it to see the activity on your network that you couldn't see before. But even that's still very nebulous to executives, especially folks that are looking to turn that ROI more into a dollar number. So I think one of the areas that we can look at ROI in security, if we can step back a little bit and look at the context of the controls we're putting in place and partner with other folks in the organization to look at where we've been able to improve efficiency. And so if we look at process improvement, like you can look at ROI from a process improvement standpoint, and you can look at what is the cost of doing something a manual way versus putting a tool in place to do it, and the man hours saved and those types of things. Like that sort of thing can be quantified. So one of the things that I've liked to do is sort of partner with the IT department or the HR department or the sales department and look at how can we facilitate their business processes and find ways to implement security controls that are paired with automation or that are paired with some other net gain that we can look at so that you're not fully just trying to base ROI on a negative and you can base ROI on that positive net measurable improvement where you're saving man hours or you're improving the efficiency of a system, the throughput of a system, and you're able to get through more sales, or you're able to, handle more customer tickets in a day, or more, whatever it is that each individual team is trying to achieve every single day in doing their jobs by removing barriers while you're making things more efficient. It's really the best way I've come up to approach it and be able to frame it and put the ROI in terms that can be measured in a way that makes sense in the way that businesses are used to measuring ROI.
No, that makes sense. Super helpful. I did have one other question if you have a couple of seconds.
Absolutely. Ask away.
Say we've done this and we followed that model and now we got some metrics and we're really off and rolling and stuff is getting done. I think we all know that priority levels rarely stay the same. One fire pops up or one thing becomes, with changing landscapes and priorities. And that thing that was super important that you just based all those metrics on and were like really cool. Now you have to shift focus elsewhere with the same amount of staffing that you have before. How do you adjust for shifting priority levels and without leaving projects for the previous high priorities unfinished and maybe even going backwards?
Oh, that's rubber hits the road right there. So if you are in or are helping manage a cybersecurity program that has that problem, that's a really good sign that you are being dynamic, right? And you're not a stagnant. We mentioned earlier, these stagnant cybersecurity programs where they get to a posture and erroneously think that that's all they'll ever have to do and never have to change and don't really do a lot of planning or road mapping or anything like that. That's a terrible place to be. If the challenge is, okay, we've been looking ahead and we're seeing what's going on or we're using external expertise or an external tool and we need to change priorities now, bravo, that's good, right? You're being dynamic, you're paying attention. But then how do you actually practically manage that? That becomes a new problem because you're right. You don't want to be, in flight in an initiative, something that's important, and all of a sudden be tempted to drop it to go do something else. So there needs to be a sensitivity given to the fact that changing priorities doesn't mean you turn your back on the other things. It may be something that we talked about unsexy things earlier, things that may not be like headliners or might not impress the board of directors, but that we know need to be done because their process or their core functionality or tools that need to be done. We don't want to turn our backs on those. We want to make sure that when we have those kind of initiatives, we're doing the background but important things that they still get done. So when the new priorities come up, we want to work them in. We want to manage them in a sensible way without dropping any of the other items on the floor. But being dynamic, it's kind of from my perspective, and I'd be interested in hearing feedback on this. I think that the truly dynamic cybersecurity program is becoming the new thing, where cyber decision makers and leadership above them in the C-suite, at the CISO level and above, are beginning to understand we're not really trying to get to that kind of last generation steady state. There really isn't a steady state in cybersecurity, and that we are embracing that it's going to always change and evolve. And so we're going to go with that. The idea of having that agile cybersecurity program, just as agile as the software developers have in their process. We put in our culture statements. We have a 4-part culture statement for our startup here. And one of them is that we're going to be agile, then agile. We say it twice because we're so focused on it. And that applies to our cybersecurity program as well as to how we build our software, that being agile, being dynamic, and being responsive is job number one. It's right up there with any of the other priorities in our mind. And cybersecurity programs should be similar so that we get the things done we need to do, but that we're not afraid to embrace change and to keep things dynamic, because Lord knows the world of the attackers and the threats and the technology is changing faster than anyone ever would have dreamt of. Not sure if that's a satisfactory answer, but that's how I look at it.
It's a lot better answer than I don't know.
Right. And I think, there may be, three things at play when this happens. Like, first, there's the possibility that project maybe wasn't actually the priority to begin with. If something else is now come up and it's obvious to supersede it. So it may just be as simple as like that project wasn't the right thing to have put in, and maybe it did need to be paused for something else. The business priorities need to supersede that, or some other priority needs to supersede that. Now, if that's happening on a regular basis, though, and that sort of is, typical mode of operation in the organization, a lot of small organizations and startups have trouble with setting priorities in general. And that can come down to, they're not managing expectations with stakeholders effectively, customers, especially if priorities are around customer deliverables and customer requests for features, for instance, in a SaaS business, that are constantly making everybody go chase the new shiny thing just because sales can't tell somebody not yet, and set the expectation of, we can't do that yet, but we can look at that in 6 months. Instead of saying yes to make a sale, promise them the world to make the sale, and everybody else has to deal with that. Like, that's really common in startups. So part of this, it just may be a symptom of a larger issue in the organization, with organizations that aren't good at priorities in general, aren't good at setting expectations or managing expectations, or potentially with leadership, like I said, that doesn't want to be bound to the policies and processes. And I've seen this too, where you've got executive leadership that, if they have something that they want done, they don't want to put it into the development lifecycle pipeline to have it go through the process. They want to expedite it and see their idea come to life right away. So, that can happen a lot, and a lot of times that comes down to leadership. It's a cultural issue. Leadership's going to have some reflection on things like that, if that's really the problem. And then the third thing may be that just the projects are too big, or that you had too many of them at a time. Either way, like if you got to roll a rock up a hill and you're trying to roll six of them up a hill and you're going to do a little bit every day, they're all going to take forever. They'll all get to the top of the hill eventually, but it's going to take forever instead of doing one at a time. So sometimes maybe a project management thing where you've got to serialize what you're working on, or it may just be that these broken down because it was too big to begin with, which means it's going to take longer to achieve those milestones to where it starts to interfere with other projects. And those other projects may be business priorities now that are going to trump the security project, simply because senior leaders are like, no, this business thing has to happen. We can't wait till the security thing's done. Whereas if that security project had been broken into smaller chunks, you could potentially interleave different business and security projects together. So that's my thoughts, at least from what I've seen in small orgs and startups and tech companies, especially when it comes to prioritization and things competing with one another.
For sure. Nope. I appreciate it. Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
Appreciate you coming on the show. It's great to have you. And our last caller on the show today is Anthony from Cincinnati. Anthony, welcome to the show. How can we help you today?
I have an interesting question that's really born out of my personal experience, but I'm sure that I'm not the only one that has pondered this. And so, to give a little bit of background, I've split my career between working in very large corporate environments and working for very small businesses. And this has presented some interesting challenges to me, especially when considering the concept of ROI on cybersecurity, because in enterprise, it's fairly clear what you're targeting there. The metrics are clear, the key stakeholders are clear, your ideal customer profile is very clear, right? You're generally talking to a CISO, worst case scenario, probably a CIO, but they're people who understand the industry very deeply, who are typically seeking you out and trying to find this. And they very much take it on themselves to handle that internal ROI, or at least that's been my experience, because they're used to performing that justification from their job role. Where the script flips for me is in working as I do now, primarily with small and medium businesses. it's much less clear. And so specifically what I mean is that if you're even just within a fairly narrow scope of what I consider to be small business, which is 1 to 500 employees, right? The things that are important to a 50-person company are going to be vastly different from what's important to a 200-person company. And even that's going to be vastly different from what's important to a 400-person company. And the people in those roles that you're going to be talking to are going to vary wildly. Everything from an IT manager all the way up to the president or CEO of the company, oftentimes a CFO as well. And they're going to have a lot different perceptions and a lot different metrics for success. How do you manage that in the small business arena, having to think about ROI from so many lenses and the perspective of so many different stakeholders and types of businesses in the SMB landscape?
That's a great question, and that builds great on the last discussion point we had on ROI. But you bring it really home when you're talking about the challenge of this. You don't have necessarily an experienced CIO or a heavy hitter CISO who already has a concept of the framework for ROI and maybe has been there and done that in the small business world. So I'm going to kind of cheat in my answer because I think it's it's pretty obvious, but I think the answer has to be people like you and people like us. When we go into those engagements, we have to bring the answers to them. We have to be prepared to educate them and bring them and kind of lay out and set the table for them of how they can slash should think of ROI for engagement X, initiative Y, requirement B, whatever it is, because they may not know anything about how they would perceive that, and they may not ask us, right? They may not say, it may come from them as just, I know I want to do this, but I don't know how to justify it. And we kind of have to come to the table either with the tools or with the processes to say, well, let me show you how we can do that. Here's how I would go about doing that, and walk them through it. And then, of course, 10 years from now, there'll be a CIO somewhere who then is the one you mentioned earlier, who does know this because we taught them. I think it's the consultants and it's the service providers like us who have to be ready for that question and maybe even prompt that question for them. That's something I do pretty regularly when I'm talking to potential customers of our platform, and they are thinking, wait, what's the justification for me to buy this software tool that you're selling, Mr. Level 6? And I'm always ready for that conversation. And in some environments, it may not be something they're used to thinking about. They may not actually be ready or have the background to consider the ROI and the trade-offs and all those things. So I think the challenge really is for folks like us to be able to go into those conversations with with a process, with a framework, with the steps ready to say, here's how to think about that. Here's an example of how to think about that, and give it to them and let them, have them reflect on it and maybe ask questions and be ready to give them all the ammunition they'll need to take to the rest of their teams and to their superiors and say, okay, here is how we're thinking about this in terms of ROI, and that'll make them look like rock stars because we helped them. We gave them the ammunition to understand the cost value equation for whatever it is they're considering. That's what I think is a big part of the answer.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And it aligns really well with a lot of my other just general experience working with SMBs, right? Because that's one of the cheat codes for working with SMBs is you have to be, in my experience, a lot more prescriptive in what you're bringing to the table, right? Where enterprises may see the value in you coming in, doing an assessment and presenting a lot of detailed answers, it's usually not as valuable in SMB because they need to know what they need to do. They've got work to get back to doing, and they need the answers to this problem. And ROI is an equation of that. And it may be, to your point, something that they may not realize is important. And it may become important on year two when the renewal comes up and maybe the business has grown, they've added a board of directors, maybe there's a CFO that's joined the team, and people start asking questions of exactly why are we spending money on this? And the worst answer that they can get back from your stakeholder is, I'm not really sure. I just thought it's what we should do.
Right.
With the different audiences, regardless of org size, you'll be stepping through sort of this general progression where when you're at the lowest level, the individual contributors on the front lines, ROI to them is all going to be about doing my job. Does this make my job easier? And then you go up to their managers, the folks that are, frontline managers, or maybe, manager of managers, but, a step or two above that, they're looking at ROI in terms of like, is this going to enable my team and make my team more efficient? And then you get up to maybe director level, and they're looking at ROI potentially is, how is this going to help my team serve other functions in the org that we have to either support or interact with in some way? Like, how is it going to make those interactions more efficient and create value there? And then you get up to the executive level, and they're looking at how is ROI from a term of enabling the business and managing risk and those types of things. So really it comes down to the audience and where you are, and kind of adjusting that dial from a tactical to strategic, from frontline up to executive as well. And what I find is in smaller orgs, then you can generally be a little bit more skewed, a little bit more to the tactical side with the leaders, because they tend to be more hands-on in the business than the C-suite executives, for instance, at a Fortune 500 company. So the bigger the org goes, the farther away from the day to day the executives get, and so they're thinking just more and more strategic business enablement. And the owner of, a 20-person mom and pop shop, they're going to wear all the hats, so they're going to be able to flip back and forth, and it's just a matter of being able to make the case each direction. But as we were mentioning with the last call a little bit ago, a lot of it may come down to looking at efficiencies instead of trying to focus on what didn't happen as the return, but like, what did happen? What can we measure? What efficiencies did we gain? What got easier? What made us more effective? Anthony, did you have any other questions for us today?
No, that was the one that was really burning in my mind.
Well, thank you, Anthony. It was great having you on the show to ask questions today. I appreciate the question and the discussion that it prompted. It was important. So, Kevin, we had 3 callers today with good questions that spawned a lot of really great conversation. Do you have any sort of parting thoughts or anything like that you want to offer to our listeners, just to kind of put a bow on things?
Well, it was a fantastic time. Thanks so much for having me on board. And the topics we touched on, unfortunately, they're one of 100 that we could have gotten into. There's so much meat on the bone here that could be touched on. But with a lot of the focus today being, first on the nature of what we do as consultants and as platform providers in this space, and then on ROI and value. I just love the fact that there is so much more. Seems to be a growing wave of focus on the bigger picture like this, on the business value of security, on understanding the impacts on the business, on cybersecurity, on types of cybersecurity from the business, and getting there, I think, is only a positive. The fact that we're having these conversations here on the podcast, I think, is putting things in the right direction. I think it puts weight behind the whole concept of, it's not just about tactical security, and it's not just about compliance, and it's not even just about strategy. It's about all of those things, and tying it all up with how it's an integrated and needs to be an integrated part of the business, taking the business's risk tolerance and the business's needs into account. Like, it seems like we're growing as an industry, that we're getting better at all of this. Maybe not quite as fast as the threats are going, but it seems like we're getting better at these conversations. And I just find the whole thing encouraging.
Building a program isn't fast. I think that's kind of one of the things that I just kind of want to reiterate after the conversation here, is for organizations that are building or maturing their programs, is it's not a big bang thing. Security, it's a maturity continuum over time, and you just have to look at, what are the most important risks, why are we doing these things, what is it we want to protect, and focus on those, and just keep making steady progress at it.
Yes.
And that's going to help you interleave that with your other business priorities and continue just making steady progress. And you can adjust again the rate of maturity there too, for what's appropriate for your org and your specific industry and the context of the business. It's just so important for folks to realize that this doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while, and you do have to prioritize and roadmap, and security. It only exists within the context of your business. So obviously your business has to do what it has to do first and foremost in order for security to even be relevant.
That's a great point. That's a great way to put a bow on it.
Kevin, where can folks find you online if they want to follow up or reach out after they listen to the show?
Well, you can absolutely find both me and Level 6 on LinkedIn. And you can just under my name, Kevin Jackson, at Level 6 Cybersecurity. And of course, Level 6 Cybersecurity's LinkedIn page. On Twitter and X, I'm at Kevin J _Cyber1. There's a lot of Kevin Jacksons out there, so that was a tough one. Had to go with whatever I could find. So yeah, looking forward to seeing anybody out there who wants to connect anytime. Shoot me a message, a DM. Would love to chat.
Thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate you coming on the show today and sharing your experience and knowledge on this topic with our listeners. I think it's really, really valuable. At least I hope they find it really, really valuable.
Hope so too.
And also, big thank you to our listeners that are listening to the show. That's right, you right now listening to this, thank you. And lastly, I want to put a big thank you out to Michael Coburn, the musician that created the great theme music for this show as well. I am Accidental CISO, and until next time, stay mindful.
Don't miss our next episode. Be sure to subscribe in your favorite podcast app and follow us on social media. Visit Focivity.com/podcast. That's FOCIVITY.com/podcast for show information and links to our social media pages. This has been the Mindful Business Security Show, brought to you by Focivity.